Hey, welcome back. We're going to now jump deeper into the question of the Kızılbaş and the rise of the Safavids, which really is a story of the largest rebellion and fight in the history of the Ottoman Empire and the creation of their sort of centuries-long enmity with Iran. Now, just really quick, who are the Kızılbaş? Literally, the term means redhead, and they become a sort of sectarian attack on the Ottoman Empire, and as we'll see, it ultimately is a political rebellion that is turned into a religious rebellion. But before we begin, let's jump in. Let's do some background review. Medieval Anatolia in the 1200s, right? This is a period that has been suggested was defined by a sort of metadoxy, right? That's in a time in which there wasn't a proper idea of what is proper belief or proper practice. That is, there was no orthodoxy or orthopraxy. Instead, people believed and continue to be Muslim in many different ways, often ways that weren't centered around legal Islam as we know it today. So they went to Sufi shrines, they followed holy men, and these holy men, these Sufi sheikhs, were often central political figures, people that can transform their political authority and their religious authority into new direct power. Now, keep that in mind, because this is the moment when it's going to change. Now, we already saw moments in which this was already occurring, such as the Sheikh Bedreddin revolt in 1416. This was kind of the first serious revolt against the Ottomans. People showed dissatisfaction, and one of the interesting things is that it pulled on dissatisfaction from lots of different sources of the population, right? So there are Christian peasants, but there are also Turkoman nomads, that is Turkish nomadic people in this period. And as we see, one response to that was to kind of institutionalize Sufi orders in this 15th century. So if Sufi orders were seen as a threat, as a possible attack, a source of dissension in the Ottoman Empire, what they needed to do now, the government tried to sponsor them officially. They gave Sufi sheikhs sinecures, that is kind of easy positions within the government. They allowed them the chance to recruit within the new kul, the new elite of the government, again, those raised through slavery. They opened up the new government elite to recruitment by these Sufi sheikhs, and they gave them money for buildings, they gave them gifts. But in return, these Sufi sheikhs were expected to support the government. They were to reject kind of antinomian or anti-government beliefs or anything that would be seen as supporting, let's say, rebellion in the political sphere. And there was actually a number of different orders at that time, Bayramis, Halvetis, Gulshanis, who became these are just different Sufi orders who became part of this new intergovernmental complex. Now, that's probably why the rebellion, when it started, didn't happen in the Ottoman Empire itself. In fact, a new figure came out of not the blue, but from the edges of the Ottoman world, and began to draw in a lot of discontented nomadic followers. That figure is a man named Ismail. He, or ultimately is known as Shah Ismail, the founder of the Safavid dynasty. But initially, he and his family were members of a Sufi order called the Safaviya, which I think was named after his grandfather. It emerges in this place called Ardabil, which is today in Iran, basically on the border between Azerbaijan and Iran today. And if you go there today, you can still see the massive tombs that the dynasty has built for their founder. Now, how did a man who was essentially the child of a Sufi sheikh become an emperor or become the founder of a new dynasty? So it kind of all starts when he was a child. Actually, his father is killed when he's 7. The Sufi family has already had a lot of support, some political support, and so therefore he's forced to go into hiding and reappears at the age of 13, all of a sudden with about 7,000 troops, mostly from nomadic groups at that time, and he starts conquering areas in what's today northern Iran, eastern Turkey. And in fact, he brings in a lot of different nomadic followers, Turkoman followers from what's today in the Ottoman Empire. And initially, most of his attacks are on the people that are controlling what's today Iran today, which is this Koyunlu dynasty, the White Sheep clan. And he spreads his message, and as he becomes more and more successful, he's spreading message, both holy poetry and a political message, written in Turkish to a popular audience. So we can look at examples of one of these poems, such as this one, which was translated. He says, with the miracle of Muhammad, the Shah's sword, Zulfikar. Zulfikar is the famous sword of Ali, the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law. As signs in my hand, I have now come. So he has some sort of magical holy sign, blocking outsiders from taking hold of the world. I am Hatai. Hatai means the sinner. That was his pen name, his poet name. As a testament, I have now come. That is, he's going to prove something of God's will in the world. Know me as always as the essence of God. I'm distinct from all that is not God. Right? So he's all of a sudden identifying himself with God. And he says the mystery of Anal al-Haq, which is the Sufi idea that you can become truth, that is, become God. This mystery of Anal al-Haq is hidden here in my heart. I am the absolute truth. What I say is truth. I am Khatai, slave to the mystery of Haydar, another name for Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. Our enemies are those who do not know the Shah as the divine truth. So think about what he's saying. He's saying basically, I've come, I have divine signs on my hand, I am God myself, and I'm going to implement God's plan on this earth. And so actually a lot of his followers thought that he was essentially a deity or an expression of the deity itself, and for that reason, the most common attack on his followers and on him was the idea that he actually believed he was God, whereas he shouldn't believe he was God because there was only one God and it wasn't him, which was a clear sign of heresy. But many people did believe that he was going to, was a Messiah-like figure that was going to bring the end of the world. And that's why, for example, this anonymous Italian merchant, one of the first foreigners to see Shah Ismail in action, and his followers referred to them as Kızılbaş, which was their common name, because they distinguished themselves by this red hat that they would wear. They had a sort of 8-sided or 12-sided hat, basically a turban that they would fold in a specific way, which would show them off as supporters of Shah Ismail. And this is what he said about them. He said the Sufi, so it just calls him the Sufi, right? He's so well known, he's just called the Sufi. So a Sufi is loved and revered as a god, especially by his soldiers, the Kızılbaş, many of whom have entered into battle without armor, expecting their master Ismail to watch over them in the fight. Others go into battle without armor, being willing to die for their monarch, crying, Sheikh, Sheikh. The name of God is forgotten throughout Persia, and only that of Ismail is remembered. Everyone, and particularly soldiers, considers him immortal. Right? So we're really talking about a space in which these people believe that he's the Messiah, that he is God, or he has some divine connection, and he's going to lead them to victory. And this led to actually increasing amounts of Turkoman, that is nomadic Turkish populations, flocking to him, going to support him, and often attacking and ransacking major Ottoman cities and towns, including in this thing called the Shahkulu revolt, which which is difficult to explain, but was a sort of predecessor to some of these attacks. And this is the moment in which Sultan Selim takes power, right? He sees this growing threat. He sees that his father, Bayezid II, isn't responding to it. So he goes over and he basically overthrows his father and then raises an army. And the first thing he does, right, he comes in 1512, 1513. A year later, he goes on campaign against Shah Ismail. Now, you can imagine Shah Ismail's followers are marching into battle on horseback without armor, and Sultan Selim has a very well-developed corps of cannoneers and artillery along with guns. And when they meet in battle, in this battle called Chaldiran, which is today basically between the border between Turkey and Iran, you can see here, Shah Ismail is very handily defeated. He's not taken captive, but this marks a moment in which the Ottomans completely decimate Shah Ismail, and essentially an unofficial border is drawn at this point between kind of Azerbaijan and Iran. And this also marks the moment in which a political rebellion is slowly turned into a new form of religious dissension, right? Because ultimately what happens is that the word Kızılbaş just becomes a synonym in the Ottoman Empire for heretic. So if you want to say that someone is a bad Muslim, you call them a Kızılbaş, even if they have nothing to do with Kızılbaş. And this is also a very, of course, difficult time for the people, the Kızılbaş, that is the supporters of Shah Ismail in the lands of the Ottoman Empire. Not only were many killed in this battle, but then a new program of suppression occurs throughout the land. Many of them are deported, sent to other parts of the empire. They're killed, etc. And this starts a new enmity with what ultimately becomes the Safavid Empire in Iran in the next 2 centuries. What ends up happening to Shah Ismail is that he retreats, he regroups, he conquers large portions of Iran, and Iran eventually becomes at least a dynasty. But for the first 2 or 3 rulers, there's still strong ideas of this divine messianic presence in their leadership. And the Kızılbaş are their core army, at least for the first 2 generations. Now, back on the Ottoman side, I do want to point out is that what is happening, and you can see this in the fatwas of this figure known as Shaykhul Islam Abu Suud. So Abu Suud is a transformational figure. He is the chief jurist or chief justice of the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century, partially during the time of Sultan Süleyman and Selim, and he's responding to, he's slowly fashioning a response to the Kızılbaş, because what they initially starts off as a political rebellion, but because they're drawing on these ideas of rebellion as a sort of Sufi-inspired sort of mystic transformation, the Ottoman government transforms this quickly into a religious rebellion as well. And so now they have to understand, well, they cast these Kızılbaş not only as political rebels, but also as heretics, right? So if we look at this legal opinion, what's called a fatwa, which is not, again, it's a legal opinion. It doesn't have specific standing, but it is issued by the highest religious member of the government. So it has some importance. He says, a question is asked to him and he's responding, which creates kind of official opinion. It says, is the war against the Kızılbaş justified, given that they claim to be Shiites and testify that there is no God but God? So the question is, these people claim to be Muslim. They say there's no God but God. They say that they're Shiites. But can we actually have a holy war against them? And he says they're neither Shiites nor one of the 72 sects destined to burn in hell. In other words, we don't even know what they are. They're not even a heretic that we know about. The Kızılbaş take a share of evil and corruption from each of the 72 sects. They've added together, according to the whims, whatever heresies and innovations they choose, and invented a composite heresy and deviation. And then he lists the things that they do wrong. That includes insulting the Quran and Sharia, burning holy books, treating scholars with contempt, worshipping their leaders as gods, cursing Aisha, Omar, and indirectly the Prophet Muhammad. Aisha and Omar are early leaders of the Muslim community in the time of the Prophet Muhammad. And so he says that these people are doing basically the exact opposite of what it is that most Muslims have to do. And so now the Kızılbaş become identified as heretics. And in fact, as I pointed out, the word Kızılbaş itself means heretic. Now, the people, the followers of Shah Ismail, these Kızılbaş, did not just disappear. Many of them continued to live in this border area and became, over time, in response to the Ottoman government's new attempt to craft a state religion, a sort of counter-religion. They developed into what is called Aleviism, or Alevi, which literally means kind of Ali-like or Ali-ish followers, in which they have a form of Islam which is probably closer to the frontier religiosity of that time. Now, of course, it's changed in the ensuing 500 years, but it retains many aspects of rituals and life from that period. In the meantime, the Safavids continued to grow, essentially creating an empire across what is today Iran and Central Asia, parts of Pakistan. Many times they actually took over, for example, Iraq and Azerbaijan, and these areas would be back and forth taken between the Ottomans and the Safavids. So Iraq would eventually be reconquered in the mid-16th century and then again in the 17th century, whereas deep campaigns would be waged across what is today essentially Armenia and Azerbaijan. And by the end of this period, you have three kind of different competing empires. When you have the Ottomans here, you have the Safavids in the middle, and then the Mughals in South Asia. The Mughals themselves rise at the end of the 16th century from a descendants of Timur, and they come to essentially conquer all of northern India and then eventually center and southern India. And found a competing dynasty. Now, what's interesting is that in each of these places, Iran, the Safavids, that is, the Mughals and the Ottomans, take a different approach to this question of religious political leadership. So the Ottomans see Sufi leaders and messianic pretensions as a threat, often. And so, as we'll see, what they do is they respond by adopting Sunnism as their formal state religion. Eventually, the Safavids also see the messianic pretensions as a threat, and they adopt Shi'ism in contrast to the Ottomans as a formal state religion. And in fact, they start converting the people in Iran to Shi'ism. They bring clerics from Shiite populations in what's today Lebanon and use them to convert the population officially to Shi'ism in this period. And we see a slow transformation of the population to where Shi'ism is now present in basically in Iraq and Iran because of this change. In response, we won't go into this, but in the Mughal case, the Emperor Akbar, for example, tries to meld together this role of Sufi sheikh and emperor into a new form. He basically turns his courtiers into his court into dervishes or followers of his Sufi order, and he makes himself into this sheikh. So each of these are different responses of using the millenarianism at that time to imagine new forms of political leadership. But what the Ottomans do ultimately is to identify themselves as a Sunni Hanafi empire. That is, today they take on a form of Islam called Sunnism, which is kind of what's sometimes considered mainstream aspects of it, and they inculcate it in the population itself. So they move away from that metadoxy, from not having orthodoxy, not having proper belief and properly defined practice, to having a very specific practice. And so what they do is they start writing about what it means to be a heretic. They start defining what heresy is. They start training the population in the most basic levels of Islam. So they say, okay, if you're a Muslim, you have to pray 5 times a day. You have to pray at the neighborhood mosque, and you have to go to the Friday prayers at the mosque. And if you don't have a mosque if you're in a town or bigger, that there has to be a mosque built there. And the mosques become centers of observation of the population, right? The prayer leader, the imam of the mosque, reports back to the government if someone is, acting suspiciously, if they're considered a heretic, etc. What we also have at this moment is the most basic ideas. I mean, at this point, we see, for example, an emphasis on people actively saying that they are Sunni, actively saying that they believe the Prophet Muhammad is the best prophet and not, for example, Jesus. All of these really basic beliefs of Islam, which are not really present in the population, are now inculcated in the population slowly. It takes generations, but it's starting to happen. And this is this moment in which Sunnism and kind of what we call formal Islamic orthodoxy today is being put in place. Now, I just want to give you one little bit of what this kind of new religiosity is often pushed both through the government and through popular pressure, through what's called ilm al-hals. This one is written by a figure called Birgivi Mehmed. He was a kind of small town writer, preacher, pietist of many sorts in the 16th century. And he and others are responsible for a genre which calls ilm al-hals, which can be translated as catechisms. Ilm al-hal means knowledge about the situation. Ilm means knowledge, hal is situation. What this means is that in every situation you should know what you should have to do according to the Sharia, according to Islamic law. Now, that means when you pray, you should be praying correctly. You shouldn't be praying just however you want, in whatever imagined way you think is correct. When you fast, you have to follow the correct rules of fasting according to Islamic law. And the same with going on pilgrimage, etc. You don't just go to pilgrimage wherever you want. You don't just bury people in every way you think is correct or according to local tradition. You do it according to Islamic law. And this is a transformational, slow change in Islamization of the society, or at least the legalization of the society. And this spreads now from basic things like prayer to things like, well, how should I conduct my business Islamically? How should I do it according to Islamic law? And how do I keep building upon this?